Hi, welcome to another episode. Please hit the subscribe button, and let's dive in. We often hear in history of Adolf Hitler of Germany and King Leopold II of Belgium, who carried out an ethnic cleansing of two groups of people, the Jews and Africans. However, the latter is not often spoken of as much as the former. The murder of 9 African Americans at the Emmanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church in Charleston in 2015, and the murder of 11 Jews at the Tree of Life Synagogue 3 years later in Pittsburgh were no doubt similar events. However, the ancient racial hatreds that provoked them, the racial hate and murder of Jews, and the racial hatred, murder, and enslavement of Africans, which together add up to the main objects of Western racism, have usually been considered profoundly different. One of the greatest writers on anti-Semitism, the French historian Leon Poliakov, considered that the European hatred of Jews and blacks occupied entirely different psychological spheres, had little, if anything, in common, and were expressed by completely different people, and for completely different reasons. George Lachman Moos, the American Jewish historian, noted that these two racism existed in separate geographical spheres. In the 18th and 19th centuries, in Great Britain, with its great overseas empire, there was a good deal of hatred of blacks, and little hatred of Jews, about whom little was known. In parts of Europe such as Germany, the Habsburg Empire, or Russia, where black people were relatively unknown, Jews were hated, and no one bothered too much about blacks. In the book Hybrid Hate, there is the fact that anti-black racism and anti-Semitism are not merely similar but have been in constant communication, overlap, and exchange with each other for centuries. In medieval Europe and in the early modern period, the demonization of Jews and blacks ran in parallel. For thinkers of the Renaissance, Jews and blacks were considered outside the usual human framework, and the idea began to spread that Jews and blacks had origins and founder events that were quite separate from the rest of humanity. By the 1820s, even Goethe had no hesitation in proclaiming that Jews and blacks had different founding events from Europeans. There were many other similarities in the way blacks and Jews were imagined, but mostly what they had in common was their position as radical outsiders. Then something odd happened. In 1777, a slave from the west coast of Africa recounted to a German missionary on a Caribbean island that in the kingdom of Loango, his home country, there were black Jews. They kept the Sabbath, he explained, did not eat with the local Negroes, and had images of snakes and lizards on their tombstones. The theorists and scientists of the time leaped upon this seemingly incredible story. The discovery of the existence of these remarkable black Jews suggested many fundamental things about the nature of race, including that Jews could come in many different colors, including pitch black. As the years passed, travelers kept finding new black Jewish communities in different parts of the world to support this notion. In Waregla, in the Sahara, an English traveler found Jews in Timbuktu, the Jordan Valley, Bombay, Cochin, and Ethiopia. This played into a growing conviction on the part of race scientists that Jews and blacks had the same origins. Note that as Jews were being constructed as blacks, blacks were also being constructed as Jews. And throughout the period covered by this book, dark, colored people throughout the world were systematically being imagined as Jews. In Africa alone, the Maasai, Yoruba, Tutsi, Zulu, Xhosa, Shona, Fulani, and Soninka, among others, were regularly constructed, racialized, and described precisely as Jews, as people with biological Jewish roots in whose lives, ideas, and practices remnants of an ancient Judaism could still allegedly be made out, and in whose languages traces of Hebrew could still allegedly be identified. Skin tone was a minutely studied subject in the 19th century. One of the greatest authorities on pigmentation was the Englishman John Beddoe. He had served with distinction in the Crimean War in the British Field Hospital, made famous by Florence Nightingale, and while he was there did a physical anthropological study of the skins of the multinational population incarcerated in the hospitals of the Dardanelles. He went on to analyze the eye and hair colors of the peoples of Europe. One of his achievements was to create a meticulously annotated index of the negrescence of the population of Great Britain. Jews scored 100% on his negrescence index, one of the largest pigmentation studies, which involved nearly 7 million schoolchildren, was carried out in Germany shortly after German unification in 1871 by the German scientist Rudolf Virchow. The teachers were provided with a set of instructions that required the children to stand in line with the blondest-haired children at one end and the darkest-haired at the other, in a continuum of hair color. This way, the children learned that there was a hierarchy of color. Skin color was shown in the study to be a function not only of what was visible, but also of the relationship between hair and eye color. Visible skin color was, in fact, of no importance. In other words, the skin color you perceive with your naked eye is not necessarily the real skin color of the individual, and there were scientific ways of determining what skin color actually is. This was precisely the point at which the hatred of Jews was being increasingly expressed in racial terms. Vilhelm Mah was the German racist who in 1879 introduced the term anti-Semitism and who is known as the father of modern anti-Semitism. Mah started his political life as an anarchist. He had no particularly anti-Jewish views and, in fact, had 3 Jewish wives. It was during an extended trip to North America that he learned how to be a racist. He had seen black slavery in action and wholeheartedly approved of it. He hated black people. His contempt for blacks was soon transferred wholesale to Jews. What the Americans did to blacks, Europeans should now do to Europe's blacks, the Jews. Filled with the views of the racist thinkers of the time, such as the embittered Scots physician Robert Knox or Joseph Arthur Gobineau, the French aristocrat who helped develop the theory of the Aryan master race, Mah argued that the blood of the despised Negro flowed freely in the veins of Jews. Jews really were somatically, as well as metaphorically, the blacks of Europe. Over the next few decades, the ancient streams of anti-Jewish hatred on the one hand and the hatred of blacks on the other joined together in a mighty torrent. Even before the rise of Nazism, the equation of Jews and blacks started to fill the media of the time. Theodor Fritsch, the well-known German publisher of the anti-Semitic magazine Hammer, stressed the sexual danger of blacks and Jews. He explained that Jews' unfortunate characteristics could best be explained by their African ancestry. The acclaimed French novelist and Holocaust denier, Louis Ferdinand Céline, went even further. He considered Jews to be entirely African. The Jew is a Negro. The Semitic race does not exist. Nazi and fascist race theorists embraced these ideas enthusiastically. There was a broad consensus among Nazi and Italian fascist physical anthropologists that black people were utterly inferior, and there were marked Negroid elements in Jews. These ideas were as present in the United States as they were in Europe. The Ku Klux Klan regularly lumped blacks and Jews together. In 1910, Dr. Arthur Talmage Abernethy, an author of some 50 books, authored The Jew and Negro. Abernethy argued that the Jew of today, as well as his ancestors in other times, is the kinsman and descendant of the Negro. As is well known, much of the inspiration for the discriminatory legal codes enacted against Jews, blacks, and others by the Nazis came from the United States, which discriminated so cruelly against its African-American population. The main problem with overall American racial legislation, however, from a Nazi perspective, was that officially the Americans did not include Jews in the category of colored. As illogical, frenzied, and neurotic streams of Judeophobia and Negrophobia ran together or in parallel to create this race madness, it emerged that blacks and Jews, as an indivisible entity, presented the greatest threat to white, Aryan civilization not only in Germany, but throughout the world. Hitler argued that Germany was threatened by blacks and had been deliberately negrified by the Jews, whose intent was to weaken and destroy German society through racial contamination. In Mein Kampf, he wrote of the Jews, systematically, These negroid parasites in our national body corrupt our innocent fair-haired girls and thus destroy something that can no longer be replaced in the world. King Leopold II would rule the Belgians for 44 relentless years and administer what was possibly the largest international scandal of its time period. With the help of explorer Henry Morton Stanley, Leopold moved throughout the Congo, bribing and tricking native leaders into signing away the rights to their land and gaining his own personal foothold in it. Eventually, Leopold conquered all of the area known today as the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He acted deviously under the disguise of what was supposed to be a humanistic and philanthropic mission to better the lives of these Congolese natives. In reality, the king was after only personal gain, capturing native resources such as ivory and rubber by any means necessary. The king's men killed villagers, looted their homes, and burned many natives of their homes to the ground. These acts of arson furthered the number of deaths in the Congo from the rules set in place by King Leopold. There was also a large number of rapes when the villages were being looted and burned. This left many Congolese people without food and proper nourishment. Many of these people would later die of starvation or disease because their bodies were too weak to fight off sickness. Approximately 10 to 15 million Congolese died under the rule of King Leopold II. All for one purpose of serving his greed. For a long period of time, King Leopold II was able to keep the abuses that were taking place a secret. Many of the first witnesses of these events were Protestant missionaries. The treatment of Jews by Adolf Hitler and Africans by Leopold II bear a striking resemblance to the ethnic cleansing of the two races in the history of mankind that no other race has ever endured. Jews, barely able to wash, were rendered black and filthy in comparison to their persecutors. The mass execution of Jews in concentration camps and the genocide of Africans all had one ultimate aim: that those races were inferior to their persecutors, whose quest to exercise power and maintain superiority left millions dead. Thanks for watching, and see you again in another episode of World Formatics.